Welcome back to Sport Integrity Week, day 2 of 5. Do get involved. The hashtag is SIW. Ben Jacobs with you. We've got an intriguing afternoon of discussion and debate. We'll be talking about following the money very shortly. We've got fireside chats, piracy debate as well. And in between all of that, your opportunity to help shape SIGA's strategy. And you can do that by syncing up your phone with a QR code, which will keep popping up periodically, or going to our social handles, and then you'll get the URL. It takes you to an Eventbrite page. And if you do wish to donate to SIGA, which is a non-profit organization, then that will help events like this and programs in the future take place. And the really cool part as well is you don't just donate, you can participate in a poll as well. And there's loads of different options, and you can actually pick how the money is distributed and thus inform our strategy. So please do get involved. The QR code will be flashing up throughout the course of the next 4 days and this afternoon as well, and on our social media handles as well, if you would like to donate. Once again, I must stress, although all of our panelists are, of course, experts in the integrity field, so are our viewers as well. It's a really impressive array, and we've had well over 1,000 of you tune in so far. So make sure that you get involved on the app and ask the tough questions, and also use social media to give yourself a voice as well. And if after these panels you'd like to be connected with anybody, please do reach out to us as well, and we'll try and facilitate some networking as well. So let's move on to our next panel. We've got 60 minutes or so to talk about following the money. The world is entering this period of global economic austerity, and sport, of course, like all other industries, is bound to be further impacted. History tells us that in times of financial hardship, governments and financial regulators tend to loosen up their nets, and criminality may unfortunately go unchecked as a consequence. So for the next 45 minutes, we'll be looking at how sports governing bodies, governments, economic regulators, financial industry services and law enforcement are all coping with fast changing global financial landscapes in this COVID-19 era. And then there's 15 minutes specifically to take your questions as well. Unfortunately, you're stuck with me moderating this one, but thankfully there's bigger brains than me to prop up the team, and I'll introduce our panel now. We've got Conrado Plano, the head of the clearinghouse department at FIFA's legal division. I'm also joined by Andrea Traverso, the director of financial sustainability and research at UEFA. Gary Coleman is the director of the US office at Transparency International, and of course the head honcho here at SIGA, the chairman of the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, Emmanuel Macedo de Medeiros. So it is a global panel that will be able to give you their input on following the money from lots of different areas. And Emmanuel, I want to start with you just to give an overview, first of all, because when people see that catchy title of Follow the Money, they'll have a vague sense of what it's about. But define for me, what is following money in practical terms, and why is it important?
Thanks for the question, Ben, and good afternoon to my friends who give us the privilege of joining us in this conversation. I think this is really the heart of the problem. It's an industry that has grown tremendously, exponentially, globalized itself, and generates an unprecedented amount of wealth that leads to synergies and externalities of different nature. But the reality is sport, and in particular football, our football, is a fast-growing, multi-billion-dollar industry. Unrivaled, unprecedented levels of growth year after year. Just to give you an idea, only focusing on the European leagues, which are the ones that I know most intimately, given my history as a founder and CEO, nearly 30 billion euros were generated in 2017-2018 in one season, which represented an increment in terms of revenue of 6% a year. No other industry shows such a vital, vibrant capacity to year after year generate revenues. But the lightest industry also has its dark moments. And the vulnerabilities are evident because in many ways, football is a victim of its success because the world evolves, but the way it has been governed, regulated, the lack of efficient supervision and oversight in many cases still remains. And this opens the door and attracts all sorts of criminality, including organized crime. And they take advantage of, on one hand, the wealth generated and the global appeal and popularity of sport, but on the other hand, the weaknesses in terms of the global regulatory system and the supervision and scrutiny that should exist, but not to the full extent it exists. So we have seen concrete examples of this growing criminal infiltration. The Europol just a few weeks ago has emphasized this concern again, a concern that we SIGA have been voicing and expressing publicly, and obviously this has to do with the areas of vulnerability. The main areas of vulnerability as far as football is concerned, I would summarize as players transfer system, club ownership investments, major sports events, and all the business surrounding these events, and the lack of a certain global leadership that we see across the system, with governments not acting with the strong pulse that was required. And that is not just the situation in European sport. Even in the US, we feel a little bit frustrated with the slowdown of the process regarding the regulation and integrity in regards to offshores and shell companies. So it is truly a worrying scenario. And I acknowledge, obviously, the positive strides that have been made. I used to say publicly for the past 20 years that one of the greatest steps forward was done by UEFA with support of all stakeholders when the club licenses system was created and then refined with the financial fair play. And I now look with a certain optimism the decision made by FIFA to finally move forward with the clearinghouse. So there are reasons to be optimistic, but vigilant is the eternal price to pay to have a clean sport with proper finance and due scrutiny. A lot remains to be done. The vulnerability exists, it's serious, and must be taken serious as well.
Emmanuel, thank you for those opening remarks. One of the last things you alluded to was how glad you were that FIFA have gone forwards with the clearinghouse. Conrado, just explain to those unfamiliar with the clearinghouse what its primary purpose is and why it was founded.
Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon as well from my side. I think the FIFA clearinghouse, as Emmanuel said, I couldn't agree more with his assessment of the current situation. The FIFA clearinghouse will help to increase the transparency in the transfer system when it comes to financial transactions. And you mentioned, Emmanuel, the 30 billion euros in UEFA. I can tell you at least 5 million of those 5 billions are within the transfer system, within transfers of players. And this is why at FIFA we take that with a lot of interest, and we understand that being a world governing body, we need to make something. We need to do everything in our power to make sure that we protect the integrity of football and we stop any abuse of the system. And that's how the FIFA clearinghouse came to be a reality that we are working on at the moment. The Football Stakeholders Committee took the decision in 2018 to start with the project. And the FIFA clearinghouse, to answer the question, Ben, will be an intermediary in the payments between clubs when we talk about transfers of players within the competencies of FIFA. So any international transfer, any type of mechanism where FIFA has competencies on. And we will start with the training rewards. The training rewards are rewards from the professional clubs to all clubs that train young players. We estimate that this will amount to at least $400 million per year. And we will start with the clearinghouse to make sure that we make sure those payments are done, that the training clubs who train young players receive the money, but also that all the clubs that are involved in these payments, that they adhere to national laws regarding integrity, regarding anti-money laundering laws, counter-terrorism financing, and sanction laws. These are the principles that we're following, and the FIFA clearinghouse will act as an intermediary between the clubs. In the first step with training rewards, and later on with agents, payments of agents, which we understand it's also one of the main points that have been raised by different governing bodies. Latest example, I think, is, for example, in Belgium, where the central bank has looked into this. There have been investigations around payments to agents, and they have themselves asked for a clearinghouse from the Belgian Association, and there FIFA will also contribute with the FIFA clearinghouse. So the FIFA clearinghouse should start operation next year, and will in the first step manage the training rewards between clubs.
Gary, that's obviously a very positive step, and certainly the wider football community and the way that money is tracked, improvements are definitely being made. But there's still that question mark of internally within FIFA, whether or not historical and even future spending is also tracked with the same level of scrutiny and transparency. So we all know about the FIFA scandal, and I believe that Transparency International did a range of work on that, resulting in your sport initiative with a series of recommendations to try and move on from that scandal. So tell us a little bit about that, and then perhaps move on more broadly to talk about how important it is that organizations like FIFA don't just follow money from those they work with, but follow their own money as well. Because, of course, in light of COVID-19, FIFA have generously given every member federation exactly £1 million of relief. And again, it's important, I'm sure you'd agree, that that money is also tracked to make sure that it's not just handed out, but is spent appropriately.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thanks for inviting me here. This is an issue that is very important to Transparency International. I think what happens in sport, as previous speakers have said, it is a growing, and a phenomenon around the world, and so therefore what happens in sport actually has a broader impact on society, and certainly some of what Emmanuel said about, and also Conrado, about whether it's terror groups or other illicit actors taking advantage of the profitability of sport is certainly a critical issue. Let me drill down on, since we're talking about following the money, drill down on a specific thing that we believe is critical if the clearinghouse and others are going to actually improve the integrity of what's going on. And so the issue right now we see as financial secrecy is really a foundation that allows for a lot of the corruption and criminality to exist. What most people don't fully appreciate and don't know is that when you form a company in most places in the world, you do not have to list who owns and controls that company. In the United States, there's many places where you don't even have to list a contact. You list no one. You literally just provide the name of the company and some other information. What that means is that you have illicit actors that are able to access, by setting up a shell company, an anonymous company, they can move money, make investments, benefit from those investments without anyone being able to find out. Law enforcement is stymied. Let me just give you one quick example. The World Bank did a study a number of years ago, and they looked at 30 years of grand corruption cases. And what they found was anonymous companies were the foundation of that transaction. That was what allowed it to happen in over 70% of the cases. And so these anonymous structures have been used in sport in any number of ways, as has been alluded to: hidden team ownership, bribery, counterfeit goods, personal tax evasion, and other nefarious activity. We understand that the financial centers are actually the big problem here. We often talk about corruption happening in Africa or South America, what have you, but Europe and the United States are key players in this, and we need to recognize the role of those financial centers. The economies are large enough that you could shift and move billions of dollars with less detection in often cases than you could in smaller economies where it would be detected if somebody deposited $1 billion. And there was one study which I think is really telling and really explains what's going on here and the dangers that we face. There was a study done out of University of Texas, Austin, some professors. They sent out solicitations to hundreds of, or thousands actually, of corporate formation agents in over 100 countries. What they got was just astonishing. And let me just give you an example of one email they got back from a corporate formation agent in Florida. The gentleman wrote back, "This is clearly dirty money. It could even be terror financing. I won't touch it for less than $5,000 a month." The scary part of that story is not that there's bad actors and people willing to do bad things in the world. We're very cognizant of that. What's scary about that story is in the United States, he did nothing wrong. That's totally legal for him to set up an anonymous company, have no idea who he's doing business with, and could in fact be helping terrorists move money in and out of the system. And so the simplest approach, what we think, is simply to ban anonymous companies. So when you register a company, you just need to say who owns and controls the company. That will shut off access through the legal structures, because right now, as I said, legal actors are helping to facilitate this. We won't end money laundering in the world, but we would clearly disrupt it. And we know that it works from several examples of where it's already gotten started. And let me just say that the European Union is a little bit ahead of the United States on this. The UK has a directory of beneficial owners up and running. The EU is about to, most of the countries have it or are in the process of setting one up. In the United States, Emmanuel and I were talking a little before the session, and I was being quite hopeful with all the craziness that you're reading about in the United States. The one potential good thing that's happening is that we might finally be able to get this transparency measure through, which will help with any variety of nefarious activities. And so, as I said, we think of ending anonymous companies. I'm happy to go into specific examples, but two last things I'll end on. One is that we see this as a foundational reform. And when I say foundational, what I mean is think about it like building a house. If you build a house and you only build the foundation, you can't live in it. But if you build a house without a foundation, it's going to fall down. And so we believe that unless you know who owns these structures, unless you cut off this access, this easy access to the financial system around the world, we're never going to be able, you could up penalties, you could put more cops in the beat, you could do any number of things, but unless you know who owns these structures, then it's going to be impossible for folks to be able to figure out who's behind it. And then finally, it goes back to how this specifically ties in with sport. And that is that we are seeing a greater, what people have called convergence. And that is where we started, is the illicit networks, whether it's rogue nations, terrorist networks, drug cartels, et cetera, that are increasingly trying to intermingle their money with legal systems and legal financial activity. And so the threat posed in the sports world, because it is such a popular and profitable venture, that threat is unique amongst many of the industries that we see. And so delighted to be here at this conference, delighted you guys exist and are doing the work you're doing. I think it's critical if we're ever going to get and tackle these kinds of issues. So,
Gary, thank you for those opening remarks. Before we open it up for debate between our panelists, let's bring in Andrea as well, the Director of Financial Sustainability and Research at UEFA. Andrea, part of that job title is financial sustainability, and many football clubs have had their financial sustainability weakened during this COVID-19 era. How can UEFA ensure that clubs remain financially sustainable? And are you worried that if their finances are weakened because of COVID-19, that will open up more threat of corruption?
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much for this invite. As you know, I'm in charge of the club licensing and the financial fair play now for some time here at UEFA, and I think the systems that UEFA introduced as a pioneer is already almost 20 years ago. Because if we talk about club licensing, we have to go back to basically the first discussions took place in 1998 and the early 2000s. Thanks to these systems, I think we managed to improve in a dramatic way transparency and disclosures within football. If we go back 20 years, I mean, talking about ownership structures and finances of football clubs, nobody knew anything about it. Today, basically, this has become almost a very common topic to discuss about, and every day you can open the newspapers and read about the financials of football clubs. I believe we achieved our objectives in the pre-COVID era, and I underline it, pre-COVID era, whereby if we go back to 2010, I mean, the financial losses of football clubs were almost approaching the 2 billion mark, and we managed to overturn these situations by creating a framework which was, before COVID, luckily, much more robust and healthy. Now, then COVID arrived. And this unexpected and unbelievable pandemic has led to a deep crisis, and it's still very difficult to understand how deep this crisis will be and how much it will affect the entire football ecosystem, and for how long. We are modeling it. We are trying to evaluate it. Obviously, there are a lot of estimates that we are doing. Today, during the ECA General Assembly that I attended virtually, some figures were presented, and they were reporting a decrease in revenues of approximately 4 billion euros. These analyses were done already a few weeks ago, and today I'm worried that the lack of revenues is even higher than what was announced this morning. Obviously, a crisis. With a crisis, there are as well opportunities. There are the winners and there are the losers. And of course, what we are assisting today is a subtle and gently changing the ownership models and ownership structures within football. There are, for example, private equity funds that are very much interested in investing in sport these days. This was not the case a few years ago, and I think for those kind of investment vehicles, there might be opportunities in the next years. Having said that, I mean, every time, I mean, we assist to those changes, there might be as well a change in the cultural approach and in the culture that we will have in football within the next year. But again, it's very early. It's still very early to see where we are going, because, I mean, uncertainty is still very much present. We are still in the full emergency. And I think that most of the clubs these days, they are really fighting for survival and operating really on a day-by-day basis without really knowing in which directions they are moving. Having said that, if I'm worried, I'm not too worried about, I mean, not more than before, I would say. What is important is that whatever kind of financial regulations or other kind of good governance regulations that we will put in place in the future will allow us to track and to have the necessary transparency on those who are investing in football. As you were saying before, transparency is key, and this is why when we talk, about financial fair play, we always refer to financial regulations. But it's not just about finances. There are a lot of other rules, and one of those is about the legal structure of football clubs. And this is why, as soon as an owner comes into football, at least here in Europe, we want to know who this person is. We want to know the legal structure of the club. We want to know the subsidiaries. We want to know any associate entity. We want to know any direct and indirect controlling party who is involved with the club. We want to know disclosure about any party that has 10% or greater direct or indirect ownership into the club. We want to have disclosure of any party that has significant influence over a club. So basically, the clubs have to open not just their books, but really give us full disclosure about their ownership structure. And I think this is clearly important because, as you said, if we need to follow up money or if we needed to monitor the various financial transactions that take place within the football market, it is important that we know with whom we are dealing.
Thank you for those opening remarks. Just briefly, Andrea, I think it's worth following up on one thing you said. The announcement that you referred to was from the ECA, and it was Andrea Agnelli from Juventus who chairs that particular organisation. So he says that there's a shortfall of around £4 billion that clubs are going to have to bear the brunt of over the course of the next 2 years. We know that UEFA have agreed a television rebate, which is also going to hit the clubs involved in the Champions League and the Europa League relatively hard. That's of £575 million. You said you think that those numbers are higher, unfortunately. Can you just briefly be a bit more specific? How much higher?
It's too early to say. As I said, we are modeling, and when I say we are modeling, it means that we are doing a lot of estimates when it comes to the next months, because we start to have a pretty good idea about the year 2020, because we are collecting the financial results of all the clubs for the season and the financial year that has just finished for most of the clubs at the end of the month of June, and we are modeling the expected results over 2021. And the more we approach the start of the season, we follow up a little bit and we look at those governments that are slowly opening to the public, and those vice versa that are announcing that they will keep a stadium closed at least for a few other weeks. And this obviously will have a huge impact on the finances of football clubs. As you know, the football clubs primarily today, they are hit because of ticketing match their revenues, of course, because stadiums are closed. As you know, their cash flow is very much affected, especially in this period, because they used to sell season tickets, and season tickets means a lot of cash for the clubs. Broadcasting as well. You mentioned that we have been hit at UEFA, of course, but the leagues as well, they have been hit. Commercials and sponsorship will be hit too. Now, to know how much, obviously this is much more difficult because this depends on the individual negotiations of each football club. So when I say we believe it will be probably more, is because today we have a little bit more visibility than already 4 weeks ago. Things moves quite quickly, and furthermore, I'm saying that because now we are in the middle of the transfer window. And if we look at the operations on the transfer market, for the time being, these are quite low if compared to previous seasons. So we expect transfer activity to move a little bit up towards the end of the window. So when we will approach probably towards the end of September, beginning of October. But we expect it to be sensibly lower than in previous years. And, less activity means less profit on sales, means that then the bottom line of football clubs will be hit quite hard. And, if this translates into massive losses for football clubs, it means that the clubs will need either to restructure or to inject cash in one way or another by increasing equity or by recurring to the market, going to the market. But it will not be easy. For many, it will be quite a challenge.
Andrea, I'll come back to you on that restructuring in just a moment, and it may need some UEFA restructuring around the rules of financial fair play as well. But I want to bring in Gary and Emmanuel in whatever order you prefer on this. It's all very well, isn't it, having this robust structure in order to follow the money and even potential punishments when people are in breach of the process. But as we've seen with Manchester City recently and UEFA, when they're punished and ultimately banned from Europe, there's still legal loopholes that allow teams to have a very prolonged and very expensive battle and eventually and ultimately get cleared. And I'm not by any stretch of the imagination saying they weren't right to be cleared. That's up to the lawyers and the Court of Arbitration for Sport to determine. But we still saw in that process, Gary, very clear evidence that said Manchester City were evasive. Manchester City did not provide a clear paper trail of how they'd spent their money and what they'd done with it. They were punished by UEFA accordingly, and ultimately they've kind of got off scot-free, at least as far as that European ban is concerned. So how do you stop clubs just being one step ahead of the corruption and finding these loopholes?
So thanks for the question. I think, we see this in many facets. This is actually not unique to sports, where we have a series of laws and structures in place. I think there's sort of two pieces that make it more difficult to hold folks accountable. One is just, again, going back to the transparency piece and making sure that we have the information outside of the clubs, that is, that people are reporting ahead of problems so that we know exactly what's going on. For example, when it was said before that private equity is more getting involved in some of these clubs, private equity goes out and raises money from large investors. They virtually, at least in the United States, they have virtually no reporting requirements. You have no idea. They can set up a pooled investment vehicle, bring in a bunch of investors. You have no idea who's behind it. And therefore, by the time somebody gets caught up in some scandal, it is up to the club to provide the information that they themselves might not even know, because they are not required to know who is behind and who's actually pulling the strings or controlling the entity. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is the issue of enforcement. And we have a culture which unfortunately, I think it's more cultural than it is legal. We can debate that, and there's probably some additional safeguards we can put in place. I don't mean to say there's not, but enforcement issues around the world have been lacking. And so being able to hold bad actors accountable, making sure that we are enforcing the laws and holding people accountable has been a problem in sport. It's been a problem with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and anti-bribery statutes around the world. We've seen slaps on the wrist, and it's become sort of the cost of doing business. And so I think there's a culture of enforcement we need to look at, but also making sure that we get the information up front and not just relying on hoping we can piece it together after the fact. So those are two things that I would sort of respond to.
Yeah. I would like to complement what Gary said. He mentioned practically the word enforcement, but I would like also to add another one, which is accountability. And this raises the question of whether all relevant authorities are doing all they can in order to ensure that the sports industry has the proper regulatory framework, that there is global coordination to tackle global problems, and that what we see being reported by independent sources, be they the media or NGOs like Transparency International or SIGA or others, are really taken into account. Because accountability is what leads the consumers, the people, the recipients of all this industry to trust the organizations. And this question is inevitable because I've been defending, fighting for a clearinghouse in football for nearly 20 years. Nearly 20 years. And the fact that we are now facing the most devastating health and economic crisis since the Second World War should not be used as an excuse to further delay what is already long overdue reforms. And whilst I applaud the FIFA for kicking off the process to a clearinghouse, I mean, the training and compensation and solidarity mechanisms are a drop compared to the huge ocean of financial transactions that occur in and in the vicinity of sports events, sports competitions, players transfers, club ownership, which means we need leadership and we need action now. Not only from those who have regulatory powers within sport, but also outside sport. The Panama Papers have been revealed 5 years ago, and they have exposed all the vulnerabilities, the inefficiencies of the whole regulatory system and law enforcement. What has changed? What has changed? We heard Andrea talking about the the investment funds, and their increased presence in football and the wider sport. How is this regulated? What kind of scrutiny and supervision this meets? I think it's time that we demand the governments to take accountability for their own affairs. Because I was even referring this yesterday, we had 5 years ago in London, under the auspices of the UK government, a global summit to put an end to corruption in sport and in business. Where are we in relation to that? Where are we in relation to that? When the same UK allows offshore and tax havens, under its jurisdiction, and because it's very easy to raise the finger and blame the clubs and everyone involved in football or being murky or a bit flexible with the rules. But what are governments doing? Are they walking the talk? Are they walking the talk? Probably if we ask the European Parliament and those who have expressed themselves over and over again, we will conclude that the response is negative. So this is, when I say this is the moment of truth, it's not just because we are facing the prospects of a second COVID-19 wave with unprecedented consequences, which we can all imagine. But it's because in the face of a moment like this, these problems can no longer be delayed. And this is why we have, not only for football, but all the sports, we have a set of universal standards which mirror the best in class and go even beyond and provide clear answers and global solutions to global problems. And this is why we encourage organizations in sport to adopt them. And seizing the fact that UEFA is here, I would like to take the opportunity to take my hat off to Alexander Seferin, because in the first meeting we had, he said UEFA will adopt these universal standards, and it's important that the sports organizations see this as an example of the path forward. So there is a lot to be done, and we need action, and we need to demand results. And this is what I say in the most constructive way, but the time is passing by and the clock is ticking.
Conrado, I'll bring you in here, if I may, and talk specifically about the clearinghouse that Emmanuel just alluded to. The projections suggest, when it's up and running, that training clubs to begin with could potentially, in a best case scenario, receive up to 4 times as much income. So explain to me where now and previously that money was disappearing to, and how the new clearinghouse is going to provide specific transparency and also, in practical terms, more money. Because 4 times more money sounds like a good thing, but that actually means it's 4 times less money over the last decades, which is quite alarming, because where has that money been? Who's been tracking it? Who's pocketed it? Who's ultimately responsible for it not reaching the right place? And is there even a logic that those working alongside the clearinghouse need to investigate that and punish accordingly, and even try and recoup that money retrospectively?
Yes, thank you, Ben. So first of all, I think the point from Emmanuel is a very valid point. It is long due that such an initiative like we're doing now with the FIFA clearinghouse will be executed. And it's not dependent on COVID-19 or anything else that we are expecting to come later. It is really because, as you say, clubs have been, specific to the train rewards, have been lacking in the enforcement of what they have to do regarding training rewards. So I think coming back to the last 2 points that Gary and Emmanuel brought up, that's, I think, exactly the point that we need to bring in. We need to bring in the enforcement of the regulations of FIFA and of all the other associations within the world of football. In specifically now with the train rewards, what you mentioned in the difference of what has been not paid so far and what will be paid through the FIFA clearinghouse, this all relates to the mechanism of training rewards, which depends on the training clubs to actually claim this money from the clubs that are engaging the players. You can imagine a small club in the middle of South America will have difficulties trying to get this information that they need. And this is where we want to change the dynamic. So instead of the clubs having to claim this money, that it is actually FIFA that will intervene in these mechanisms, ask the clubs engaging players to make the payments to the clearinghouse, and the clearinghouse distributing the money to the training clubs. And this is where we come back to what Gary mentioned before, the financial secrecy, which with the clearinghouse we want to avoid. So with the clearinghouse being located within the EU and following the EU directives on payment services, we will apply all the applicable national laws on transparency, on declaration of beneficial owners of the entities. And as such, we expect that we can set a bar that all the clubs will have to abide to so that they can participate in this financial system, in the transfer system. And this is how we want to start with the clearinghouse, which will also include the governance standards that we have discussed as well. Because in order to be able to make the payments through the FIFA clearinghouse, the clubs will have to meet these governance standards. And the last point is that we will need to enforce this. And as you said before, it's difficult to enforce when we are talking about so many parties in very different parts of the world. The idea with FIFA is that we have minimum standards that we can define within our regulations and that we can enforce that in the usage of the FIFA clearinghouse. And basically meaning that we're creating a closed system where the entities that can participate in this and are allowed to do it have to abide to the laws that are applicable within the EU and within the FIFA clearinghouse. And I think, as I said before, it's long due that we do something like this. And even if we start with the training rewards, this will include a vast majority of clubs. We're talking about more than 15,000 clubs per year that will receive payments. That will include professional clubs and also training clubs. And we believe that this is the right approach, but we need to go further. As Emmanuel said, we need to go into payment situations and payments in general for transfer fees so that we can really bring the whole transfer system into the FIFA clearinghouse.
Thank you, Conrado. And you get praise as well from Jonathan Booker, who is watching. He says some very encouraging signs coming out of the new FIFA, that's FIFA 2.0 as it's officially known under Gianni Infantino's election pledges and strategy. He says at operational levels such as the clearinghouse, long may things continue and the improvements be realised. I would never have thought that 6 years ago I'd be complimenting FIFA, but credit where credit is due. So congratulations specifically on the clearinghouse. And I'm going to start putting questions to all of you now from those listening, because we've got a number of experts in about 15 minutes to wrap up, and then I'll take your closing remarks as well. Andrea, first at UEFA, can you just elaborate on financial fair play? There's talk that the rules pertaining to it are going to have to be relaxed. Do you envisage financial fair play changing imminently because of COVID-19? And if so, what might be some of the knock-on effects? Because unfortunately, if the rules are relaxed, it could prove a step backwards in terms of corruption, because it may give clubs more flexibility with their finances to find loopholes in the short term. I think we're just having a few issues with sound at the moment.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Right,
Yeah.
when I ask a big question,
That's
you
better now.
thinking it might be intentional in some ways. Don't want to answer the question, so just mime.
Okay. Is it okay?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, good. So, as you know, when we got the back in March, when the pandemic broke through, and we were very quick in setting up an emergency task force in order to take appropriate measures to face the pandemic. And among those measures, we intervened immediately in order to amend the financial fair play regulations. So we have taken a number of measures over the next couple of years in order to basically take the necessary time to evaluate the impact of the pandemic, because when we started the discussions in March and April, we didn't know in which directions we were moving. And also today, I mean, there is still a lot of uncertainty. Today, I think the objective is really the survival of football clubs. Sustainability meaning making sure that football clubs don't necessarily go bust, trying to save as much as we can. You know, the pandemic has generated a revenue crisis. A revenue crisis translates into a cash crisis. So there is a desperate need of cash. Cash primarily is needed to pay the players, to pay the salaries, and to honor the various commitments, to pay the various transfer fees in order to avoid that the whole system collapses. It is early to anticipate in which directions we will go with financial fair play. I believe that the world post-COVID will be quite different, especially the sporting world after COVID will be different. And different will be the challenges that we'll have to face. For this reason, I believe that some adjustments to the rules will be needed. The rules will need to be changed in order to face the new situations, the new normal that will exist after COVID. Does that mean that the rules will be weakened? I'm not so sure. The rules might be amended, but amending the rules, amending the objectives, having different rules, it does not necessarily mean that the rules will be weaker than what we had so far. So again, I think that using that adjective is not necessarily correct. I believe adoptions are today's necessary in light of the pandemic. This is for sure. But let's wait and see. I think I hope at least that in a few months from now we can see a little bit clearer. And then, I mean, we will have to define the path for the future. But as you said, we cannot go back. We cannot go back 10 years. I mean, it would be a disaster if we would move backwards, because this would definitely. I mean, we would destroy everything that we have built up in the last 10 to 15 years. So I think there will be an evolution of the system, and which is nowadays probably more than necessary with the pandemic.
And just literally in one word, yes, no, or probably, if there was to be any concrete changes, do you envisage them being introduced in or for the 2020-2021 season, or is that too early?
So, you know, any change will require a big consultation with all the stakeholders, and this is one of the let's say of the real benefits that came out with this pandemic, is that the world football family showed a great unity during the crisis, and as we did in the past, and we will continue to do it in the future, we will consult with all the stakeholders before adopting new regulations. So consultations means that we will have to carefully study all together the consequences, discuss together, adopt new rules, implement new rules, and all these kind of things necessitate time, reflection and time. So when you say introducing them for the 2021 season or 21 and 22 season, I mean, especially the 2021 season is clearly too late, because is about to start the season. Therefore, we are not ready. Whether we will be ready next year, we will have to see. We will have to see whether the pandemic will still be with us or not. And but I think I mean it will be we need at least 12 months of consultation. This for sure. This is at least what we had in the past, and I believe this is what we will need today as well.
I would like to make a quick comment, if I may. I share entirely the diagnosis that was now expressed by Andrea. It's absolutely right. It's a case for many clubs, most clubs, a case of life or death. They are already in very difficult financial situations in the pre-pandemic era, and now these vulnerabilities, these difficulties have exacerbated. But that is related with the sustainability of clubs and football as a whole. A different question, a different era, is the integrity and the transparency of these financial operations, and including where is the money coming from, where is the money going to, and who are the intermediaries on all these financial transactions. And that opens the link to club ownership. Who are the real flesh and blood owners of the clubs? Not just in Europe, but everywhere. Take Brazil, for example. Who are they? Or Argentina. Who are they? And elsewhere. Who is behind these shell companies, these opaque, murky shell companies whose identity nobody knows, not even sovereign states? I ask why, and for how long still? Why is the transfer system being contaminated with suspicions about the way the money comes from and goes to, and how image rights are also used to in this system in many times not in a transparent way. So for issues related with sustainability, obviously it's a matter of common sense that those who regulate the sport, UEFA in particular, who has been absolutely a trailblazer in this field, needs to have realism and tackle this unprecedented crisis with unprecedented measures. But as far as integrity and transparency are concerned, there must be no exception. There must be no slowdown, because we are already too late in many ways, despite the signs of progress that we see here and there, and they are encouraging. But we cannot take the foot out of the pedal, because in many ways we have a 21st century industry run and governed and scrutinized as we were still in 19th century. So this calls for action. International organizations, stop the talking shops, take action, take decision, so show results. Governments, the same. The concern of governments must not be focused on the voters in the next election, on the PR and the window dressing policies. These are real problems, and the sooner the better, because at the end, it's the people, it's the consumer, it's the real economy who pays the price, and the black economy scores, but the legitimate, licit economy and all its consumers and all its agents lose. We do not want that, and that is why we are committed to action. And I'm glad to see that not only we share the diagnosis, but we share the impetus to take action.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Gary, I want to bring you in with a question that I think you're most qualified to answer. What can be done about national associations themselves not being totally transparent and cooperative with, say, the likes of law enforcement, tax authorities, and so on their football finances?
So there's a number of things that national organizations can do. Working with their local governments or their national governments can implement laws that impact the sport, but also the broader economy. And just if I could just make one quick comment on what Emmanuel and Joyce were talking about. We often think about corruption and illicit finance in these measures as having a long-term sustainability impact. And that's true. But what we're seeing in times of COVID and in this emergency situation, there's also very, very immediate impacts. And I would hope that the sporting world would look to other sectors and other entities that have been putting in place these measures. So, for example, when the United States passed a bill to give $2 trillion, pump $2 trillion into the economy and spread it around to hundreds and millions of businesses, there was an immediate push to say, we need to get this money out quickly. Let's just lift all the rules that protect us against fraud. And what ended up happening is hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, went to fraudsters, and the people that actually needed the money, when they went to go get it at the bank, it wasn't there. And so you have millions of businesses, 10% of all US small businesses in the United States have gone bankrupt and are done. They are out of business forever. It's 3 million companies. And so when we take a look at individual sporting teams, they should partner with their national governments to improve laws on transparency. I would say, number one, not to reiterate, but the ending anonymous shell companies is the primary thing, but also making sure that there's due diligence responsibilities. We've heard a lot about private equity getting involved in team ownership and the opacity there. They should be responsible for making sure that before they take on investors, before they take on clients and move their money, that they do some due diligence to make sure that they know who they're getting the money from and where it's coming from, so that if there is a problem in the future, that the private equity firm can actually provide law enforcement with the names of the people and not go, oh, well, we didn't ask, so we don't know, and now they're long gone, and they just stole the money, which is a huge problem. So it is both. So those are some things that they need to do. But I also want to say that we shouldn't take the foot off the pedal, as Emmanuel said, not just because it's long-term sustainability, but there are immediate impacts in terms of clubs going belly up if they don't ensure that the money that is being pumped into these clubs right now is being used in a way that will sustain them for the future. We won't have a lot of time. There's a lot of money that's being lost, and there's some serious consequences unless we make sure that there's accountability right now.
Absolutely, and well said. We've only got a few minutes remaining, so I'm going to put one more question to any of the panel that wish to answer it, and then we'll get your closing remarks, each please, in about 30 seconds or so. Jason Heaton is also watching, another expert in his field. He, of course, the General Secretary of CONIFA, based in Newquay at the moment in Cornwall. Thanks for your question, Jason. He says, full credits to all involved in this conversation. Could the tones of accountability, responsibility, truth, and integrity be turned into one expectation, and can and should it be promoted as such? Which one the panel would like to comment or respond to that?
I can kick off, and considering these are probably my final words, I would like to thank everyone for this very high-level, straight to the point conversation. I think we have hit some very sensitive nerves, and this conversation has been very honest and very constructive and productive. What I would like to say is the following: we know what the situation is, how grave it is. The crisis, the word that has been mentioned every day by everyone, exists, and it will go deeper with more severe and impactful consequences. We know that. Sport and the sports governing bodies are taking all the solutions at hand to alleviate this impact. This comes with a price, and that is clearly understood. But a completely different thing, a complete different issue, are the integrity and the transparency of all these operations. These are really difficult moments. We have waited a long time to be here. We need everyone to take accountability for their own affairs. The problems are global, they require global solutions. I invite, I ask, and I challenge every sport organization, including the international federations, to see what's real and to take action. This will not be solved by self-assessments, by mere academic exercises. This requires the adoption, implementation of a set of robust, holistic, real measures, real universal standards that can shield sport, can protect its reputation, its integrity, so that everyone can enjoy clean sport as we deserve, and the industry can be properly sustainable. These universal standards are, in our view, the SIGA universal standards. And we must be accountable. And accountability comes with independent assessment and verification and scrutiny. For that, we developed the SIGA independent rating system. like UEFA has done, the International Mixed Martial Arts Federation has done, many other organizations have done. We want to see the international federations of all sports not using excuses to delay what is an emergency, and that is to adopt SERFs, because only that they will be accountable to the people, to the fans, to the global industry, and justify the passion and investments that are made. The invitation is made with clarity, and I expect a clear answer in this regard. And thank you once again for everyone for the remarkable efforts that you are doing. And if I may also add a piece of information, the reason why Emilio Garcia is not with us is because he is with the FIFA Audit and Compliance Committee discussing precisely the COVID-19 and how to ensure integrity and transparency in all these funding mechanisms. Thanks again.
Emmanuel, thank you very much indeed for your participation. Emmanuel, incidentally, will be back in a fireside chat very shortly in about half an hour's time. He's a busy man. Go get a cup of tea and honey in it to preserve your voice. Let's just get some closing thoughts from the rest of the panelists, and then we'll wrap things up in the next 2 or 3 minutes. Andrea, feel free after you've answered this to wrap things up more generally, but I think it's really important when we talk about following the money and any of the issues this week that we're not talking about the men's game. In fact, we're not just talking about football. A lot of our panels are about all sports, but there's a clear focus and protection on both sexes and all levels of the game. And Victoria Condo Sancho has specifically written to you and applauded a lot of your words, but also added, where are women in the picture of this current crisis? So maybe just reassure her, because she's an MA student in sports ethics and integrity in Leuven in Belgium. Maybe just reassure her that your department is focusing equally on both sexes with the work that you do.
Correct. Absolutely. I mean, I'm very happy to hear that remark and these comments, because as from this year, we have introduced the similar standards to men's football when we come to club licensing to women's football. So for the first time during the year, we introduced criteria that all women's clubs have to fulfill in order to be able to participate in European competitions. And this will obviously, as we did with men's football, raise up standards and professionalism within women's football. So we are very much active in this field. UEFA as an organization has women's football on top of its priorities for the future, so she can remain assured we are working equally on women's football too. So we are very much on it. And thank you very much to all of you for your participation and contribution.
Thank you to you as well. I appreciate your candid words. Gary, if I can turn to you next to provide some closing thoughts.
Sure. Again, thank you for inviting me to participate in this. This is a very encouraging discussion that there's so much focus on this set of issues. I think sports, as we can all agree, has sort of a unique place in our cultural institutions. And so, as has been said, undermining the integrity of sports, I think, has a broader impact. So would encourage and would love to continue to work with folks at SIGA and elsewhere to make sure that we follow through on these commitments. I think that is going to be the key thing. Is we've seen laws pass, we've seen some enforcement actions, although as we talked about, we need to see more. But as we've seen in several places, right after the Panama Papers, there was a big rush and a bunch of conferences and people talked and made commitments. And 3 or 4 years after that, we're now sort of wondering where those commitments are at. And so we need to be in this for the long term. We appreciate the sustainable commitment from the folks here and the good work they're doing, and hope that we can work together to make sure that governments also maintain their commitment. And it's not just at the end of one particular scandal that there's a lot of talk and then we move on. So encourage you all to stay engaged and happy to work with you. And thanks again.
Gary, thank you. And Conrado, congratulations on the forthcoming clearinghouse. The final word goes to you.
Thank you very much, Ben. So as well from me, thank you to my fellow panelists. It has been a very good discussion with a very good level. I think the points that have been brought up are very pertinent to what we need to do. We all see this sense of urgency that there is to, even in these times of pandemics, to make sure that we go in the right direction. And I think in order to achieve our goals, we need to have the support and the action from all the associations and organizations within the football world. And we're very much looking forward to that and happy that we have the support from them. But we will put our words into action in the next months, and hopefully we'll have a good success story to tell, but many more things to do in the future.
Great stuff. Very interesting from all of our panelists. Do keep engaging as well. Thanks for your questions and comments. And as I've said repeatedly throughout the week, if you want to be connected with a specific person, please do reach out to us as well if you don't already have their contact details. But for now, thanks once again to all of our panelists. That ends Follow the Money. And coming up in about half an hour, it's Emmanuel again. He has a fireside chat, socially distanced, of course. And unfortunately, there's not an actual fire either. But he'll be talking to Francis Gurry, and we'll have more details coming up on that panel in about 25 minutes. So stay with us here. It's day 2 of Sport Integrity Week, powered by MasterCard. Loads to get through. We've got a discussion on piracy coming up as well at 4 o'clock GMT. That's 5 o'clock CET. But for now, thanks for listening, and we'll be back in about 20 minutes.
Hello everyone, and greetings from Budapest, Hungary.
Hello from Kosovo.
My name is Jerice Cologne.
My name is Rusa.
I'm Ian Smith.
Cameron Casoglis.
Edwin Moses.
My name's Afi Sheikh, and I'm Head of Standards and Integrity Services here in London, England.
I'm Senior Manager of Member Associations Governance Services at FIFA.
Integrity is the bedrock of all competitive sport. Without it, there is nothing.
By definition, it is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles.
Integrity is surely one of the most significant elements in sports.
As a cricket umpire, one of the most important tasks for any umpire is to make sure the decision making is as efficient as possible. This can only be possible if umpires work with integrity.
Perhaps now more than ever, we recognize the importance of this vision for sports and the need for integrity in every aspect of sport.
We are a member of SIGA, and not only because we believe in integrity in sports, but to the fact that we believe in coalitions and collective efforts to achieve change.
We all know that sport is one of the most powerful things on the planet for bringing about societal change, and we all want to be part of that, and we want you to be part of it, and we absolutely all need to do it together.
This is a task none of us can achieve on our own. It is one that all of us must achieve together.
I believe that together we're stronger.
Together, united, we can effect positive change by developing and promoting integrity principles and values.
I would like, first of all, to praise SIGA's leadership in the persons of its chairman and its CEO for having had the courage to organize this event under the current circumstances.
Thank you to SIGA for the work that you do for sports integrity and for the example your independent rating and verification systems for the world of sports.
Organisations such as SIGA, who are there to make standards better and to uniform all the standards throughout the industry, are needed.
SIGA is unavoidable and unrivaled organization with unrivaled role in the field of the integrity of the sport.
I think this first Integrity Week is very important.
ISST is proud to be associated with the SIGA movement.
I am proud to partner with the Sport Integrity Global Alliance and participate in this year's Sports Integrity Week.